Most people in the prepping world make the same mistake. They build the same pantry from the same lists, buy from the same stores, and assume the safest plan is the most obvious one. Rice, beans, canned vegetables, maybe a few buckets of freeze-dried meals if the budget allows. It sounds sensible, right up until the shelves get hit. That is the part almost nobody talks about. In a real supply disruption, the foods everyone has been told to buy are usually the first to disappear. White rice gets cleaned out in hours. Dry beans go next. Canned staples vanish right behind them. And then people stand there, staring at empty aisles, shocked that the exact plan they copied from everyone else led them straight into the same bottleneck. I learned that lesson the hard way during a supply chain mess a few years ago. The mainstream prepper foods were stripped out fast, but a handful of less obvious staples were still sitting there, untouched, cheaper, and in some cases even more useful. Not glamorous, not branded as survival food, just smart foods hiding in plain sight. That is what this list is really about. Not buying exotic items for the sake of it, not trying to be clever, just avoiding the crowd, protecting your budget, and building a pantry that still works when other people are fighting over the last bag of rice. And once you notice the pattern, it becomes hard to unsee. The best emergency foods are not always the ones with the loudest marketing. Sometimes they are the quiet things most people walk right past. The first one proves that immediately. Bouillon cubes may be one of the least impressive-looking items you can put in a pantry, which is exactly why they are so useful. Most people see a tiny box of cubes and think seasoning. Nothing more. But in a long emergency, bouillon is not just flavor. It is morale insurance. Imagine eating rice for the 5th straight day. Or beans again. Or plain noodles. Calories matter, of course. But anyone who has actually lived through a stretch of repetitive meals knows the real problem shows up before hunger does. It is food fatigue. The sense that every meal tastes the same and every meal becomes something to endure instead of something that keeps the household steady. That is where bouillon quietly earns its place. One small cube can turn a pot of plain rice into something savory. It can make lentils feel like soup. It can rescue a meal that would otherwise taste flat and forgettable. For a few cents per serving, it gives basic staples enough flavor to stay edible for weeks, not just days. There is also a practical side preppers often overlook. Bouillon is compact, cheap, and easy to store. A few dozen cubes take up less room than a single carton of broth, and they do roughly the same job. In many stores, a box costs around $1 or $2. That means $30 can buy enough cubes to improve hundreds of meals. Compare that with freeze-dried entrees at $10 to $15 each, and the math gets embarrassing fast. And in a real strain event, that sodium is not trivial. If people are sweating more, eating less variety, or drinking plain water without enough minerals, having a salty, savory base can help maintain appetite and make hydration easier. Not a miracle food, just one of those small, unglamorous tools that does 3 jobs at once. Store them in a dry jar, keep moisture away, and they will sit there quietly waiting for the day bland food becomes a serious household problem. And if that sounds too simple, the next item is even easier for most people to ignore. Dried seaweed is one of those foods many people only think about in a sushi context, which is a mistake. In a preparedness pantry, it is compact nutrition that almost nobody competes for. The first advantage is obvious the moment you hold it. Seaweed weighs almost nothing, takes up very little space, and still brings something most staple-heavy pantries struggle with: micronutrients. If your food storage is built mostly around grains, beans, pasta, and canned basics, one of the weak points is not calories. It is nutritional variety. Seaweed helps cover part of that gap. Nori, wakame, and dulse each offer slightly different benefits, but the big one is iodine. And iodine matters more than many people realize. It supports thyroid function, which affects energy, temperature regulation, and metabolism. In normal times, people get it from a wider diet without thinking about it. In a restrictive pantry diet, that safety net gets thinner. A single sheet of nori can provide a meaningful amount of iodine for almost no cost. A multi-pack may run just a few dollars, and it lasts because you use it a little at a time. Crumble it into rice, soups, noodles, or beans, and the meal instantly tastes more finished. Not fancy, just less like emergency food. There is another reason this works so well: availability. During panic buying, mainstream shoppers rush the familiar shelves. They are not usually clearing out the seaweed section at an Asian grocery store. That means a food many households could genuinely use often stays in stock while the obvious items disappear. It also adds a small quality of life improvement most emergency plans ignore. Seaweed gives stored food a different texture and a subtle savory depth that makes repetitive meals easier to tolerate. That matters more than people think. A pantry is not just about surviving the first week. It is about staying functional if disruption stretches longer than expected. By this point, you may be noticing a pattern. The overlooked foods are not necessarily trendy. They are simply useful, affordable, and outside the usual panic buying script. And the next one may be the best example of that. Potato flour is one of the least discussed pantry staples in preparedness circles, which is odd because it solves several problems at once. It stores well, works in multiple recipes, and can turn very simple ingredients into something that feels like real food. First, it helps with flexibility. A lot of stored foods are ingredients that still need structure around them. Rice is rice, beans are beans, oats are oats. Potato flour can help bridge that gap. Mix it with water and a little salt, and you can make a simple flatbread on a pan. Add it to soups or stews, and it thickens quickly. Stir a small amount into a thin meal, and it suddenly feels more substantial. That matters, because texture changes satisfaction. A bowl of watery soup feels scarce. A thicker soup feels like dinner, even when the ingredient cost is almost identical. 1 tablespoon of potato flour can do the thickening work of several tablespoons of cornstarch, so a small bag goes further than most people expect. It is also useful for households that cannot rely on wheat. If someone in the family is gluten sensitive, that issue does not disappear during a disruption. In fact, it becomes more important because specialty options are often the first to become expensive or unavailable. Potato flour gives you a shelf-stable backup that works without that problem. Price is part of the appeal too. A 5-pound bag for around $8 can provide dozens of uses. That is a very different cost profile from branded emergency foods that promise convenience but deliver little flexibility. Properly sealed in an airtight container with an oxygen absorber, potato flour can last for years. It is not a glamorous purchase. Nobody shows off a bag of potato flour. But that is often the point. The foods that do not attract attention are usually the foods still sitting there when the attention economy turns into a shortage. And if potato flour is practical, the next category is where practicality starts to overlap with psychology. Asian instant noodle blocks get dismissed far too quickly in prepping conversations, usually by people who have never tried living on a repetitive pantry rotation for more than a few days. On paper, they look too ordinary to matter. In practice, they may be one of the smartest morale foods you can store. This only becomes obvious when you actually eat your pantry. Around day 10 or 12, the issue is not always calories. It is sameness. The same grains, the same textures, the same flavors, over and over. Adults get irritable, kids start refusing food. Decision-making gets worse because every meal feels like a low-grade disappointment. That is where better quality instant noodle blocks outperform their reputation. Not the cheapest packets in a discount bin, but the more substantial varieties sold in Asian grocery stores. Many cost around 50 cents to $1 each, some a little more, and they often come with more complex seasoning, dried vegetables, mushroom powders, chili pastes, or soup bases that taste like an actual dish instead of just salt. The noodles themselves can also be more satisfying. Some have better texture, some include egg, and some offer a little more protein than the standard bargain pack. More important, they create variety fast. One night the pantry feels like miso. Another night it feels spicy. Another night it turns into a quick soup built from leftover vegetables and an egg if you have one. That variety is not a luxury. It helps people keep eating, keep cooperating, and keep thinking clearly. Food monotony wears on a household faster than many planners expect. And there is a strategic shopping angle here too. When mainstream stores are stripped bare, many shoppers still do not think to check an Asian supermarket. That blind spot can be a real advantage. Sometimes the best backup plan is simply shopping where fewer people are looking. Now, once you start seeing how much emergency food planning focuses on dry carbohydrates, another weakness becomes impossible to ignore. Most stockpiles are badly underbuilt on fat. Canned coconut milk is one of the easiest ways to fix that without refrigeration, and it does more than people expect. In many pantries, calories are present, but dense, usable fat is not. That becomes a problem quickly when weather is cold, stress is high, and meals are built around lean staples. Rice has essentially no fat. Beans have very little. Many freeze-dried meals stay shelf-stable by keeping fat low, which may help storage life but does not help much when your body needs sustained energy. Coconut milk changes that equation immediately. One can deliver a substantial amount of fat and calories, usually for around $2 or a little more. That means a very ordinary pot of rice can become far more filling with half a can stirred in. A basic soup can become richer and more satisfying. A thin pantry meal can suddenly support more people because the calorie density has increased. This is one of the few shelf-stable items that can make food feel both more generous and more functional at the same time. It is also versatile enough to justify the space. Use it in curries, soups, rice, oatmeal, sauces, or even simple emergency cooking where you just need a calorie boost. And because it is canned, storage is simple. Keep it cool, rotate it normally, and watch for damaged cans. That is it. There is a quiet psychological benefit too. Creaminess changes how people experience scarcity. A meal with some richness feels less like rationing. That may sound soft, but it matters when you are trying to keep a household calm under pressure. If you have ever looked at a typical prepper pantry and thought, this is a lot of starch and not much else, you are already seeing the problem. And the next food may be the most efficient answer on the list. Ghee solves a problem that most emergency food plans leave in plain view. How to store cooking fat without turning it into a refrigeration issue or a short shelf life headache. A lot of people assume they can just rely on butter, oils, or whatever happens to be in the kitchen at the time. Then a power outage hits. Temperatures swing, and suddenly those fats become unreliable, messy, or limited. Ghee is different because it is clarified. The milk solids are removed, which dramatically improves shelf stability and makes it far less fragile than ordinary butter. That matters for obvious reasons. Fat is not optional. It supports energy, warmth, satiety, and the absorption of certain vitamins. It also makes food taste normal. A spoonful of ghee stirred into rice, beans, lentils, or potatoes can take a meal from survival grade to genuinely comforting. And comfort counts. In a stressful week, 1 tablespoon of stable cooking fat can do more for morale than another pound of dry starch. It changes aroma, mouthfeel, and satisfaction immediately. That is not theory. It is household management. The price is also more reasonable than many branded preparedness products. A jar at around $12 to $15 may seem expensive at first glance until you compare it with specialized emergency fats, powdered butter products, or snack bars marketed for survival. Ghee is just real food with a long utility window. Storage is almost insultingly simple. Keep it sealed, dry, and out of direct heat and light. Rotate it through normal cooking. No special system required. That simplicity matters because complicated storage plans tend to fail first in ordinary life. There is also a culinary advantage hiding in plain sight. Ghee has a rich, nutty flavor that can make very plain pantry staples feel intentional. And when food starts feeling intentional instead of desperate, the whole emotional temperature of a household improves. But there is still one final item that may be the most quietly strategic of all, because it helps with both fullness and water management at the same time. Chia seeds are easy to underestimate because they look like a health food accessory, not an emergency staple. But in a serious pantry, they are one of the most compact tools you can store. The first reason is simple. They do not need cooking. That alone makes them useful. You can stir them into oatmeal, rice, yogurt, canned fruit, or plain water and let them hydrate. In any situation where fuel is limited, convenience rises in value very quickly. The second reason is fullness. Chia absorbs many times its weight in water and forms a gel, which slows digestion and helps meals feel more substantial. That may not sound dramatic, but think about the cost consequence. If 1 tablespoon added to a basic breakfast helps someone stay full for several more hours, your pantry starts stretching further without increasing the size of the meal by much. That is exactly the kind of advantage people miss when they focus only on calories per pound. Efficiency is not just storage volume. It is how long the food keeps people satisfied. Chia performs unusually well there. It also brings useful nutrition in a very small package: fiber, some protein, minerals, and omega-3 fats. Not enough to replace a full diet, of course, but enough to strengthen one that is otherwise heavy on starch and light on diversity. As a side benefit, it is less processed than many emergency snack products marketed as nutritional insurance. Price-wise, it is not dirt cheap, but it is still practical. A bulk bag can often be found for a fraction of what people spend on prepper supplements, and it works as food, not just as a pill bottle promise. Stored in airtight containers away from light, it holds well and takes up very little room. And that brings us back to the larger lesson. The smartest pantry is not the one that looks the most impressive online. It is the one that avoids the crowd, covers more weaknesses, and keeps your household functioning when conditions become inconvenient, expensive, or uncertain. Bouillon cubes solve flavor fatigue. Seaweed adds compact micronutrients. Potato flour creates flexibility. Better instant noodles protect morale. Coconut milk and ghee cover the fat problem most stockpiles ignore. Chia seeds help meals stretch while supporting fullness. None of these foods are magical. That is exactly why they are so useful. They are ordinary enough to be affordable, practical enough to rotate, and overlooked enough to still be available when the obvious shelves are empty. So the real advantage here is not just what to buy, it is how to think. If everyone rushes in one direction, scarcity usually follows. If you build a pantry with a little more range, a little more realism, and a little less herd behavior, you give yourself something more valuable than a stockpile. You give yourself options. And options are what keep people calm. If this helped you think differently about food storage, consider subscribing. And if you are building or refining your pantry right now, ask yourself one honest question. How much of it is truly designed for real life, and how much of it was copied from everyone else? That answer can save you a lot of money and possibly a lot of stress later on.